It's hard to believe that it's been more than a year since the launch of the Epic Game Store, and to say that Epic's launcher was polarizing would be a bit of an understatement. Between the constant timed exclusivity deals throughout 2019, scooping up upcoming Steam releases to make them timed exclusives, to accusations around launch that the program was malware thanks to Epic being backed by Chinese conglomerate Tencent, everyone hated the EGS and it looked like it was shaping up to be a massive flop. Well, 1 year later and the Epic Game Store still seems to be around and kicking, with a solid start to their first year. Admittedly, I didn't have any plans to download the launcher beforehand, since I was one of the many upset at games like Metro Exodus and Shenmue 3 becoming timed exclusives, but that eventually changed when I saw Saints Row 3 Remastered get released. After seeing it launch around the same time as Epic's mega sale with a $15 off coupon, I basically bit the bullet and downloaded the client. It's basically what led me to work on this video. Consider this more of a general overview about the current state of the client. While I'm more positive to Epic now than I ever was the past year, the storefront still has a ton of problems and needs to work out, lest it fall into obscurity like nearly every other launcher except for Steam. But that's jumping ahead quite a bit. Let's reel it in a bit and start at the beginning. My first impressions with the Epic Store were quite bad. The first thing you noticed beyond the giant mega sale banner was just how barren the launcher felt. Not in terms of games, mind you, but in terms of features that I didn't realize I was going to miss. The most notable missing feature was the absence of any community hub to talk about games, whether it was for posting screenshots, artwork, guides, or even just a place to talk about technical issues with the game. When I first installed Saints Row 3 Remastered, I encountered a glitch where the save icon would be on screen at all times, but when I tried to do a manual save or tried to exit the game just didn't save, which led to me replaying the opening mission 3 times before I had to search online for a fix. I later found out through a thread with barely any upvotes on the Saints Row subreddit that this error was due in part to me owning the full package version of Saints Row 3 on GOG, and I think this led to an issue where Saints Row 3's Remastered couldn't save over the original data for some reason. Now the fix isn't that hard to do. All I had to do was just delete an old folder in my local app data directory, and it didn't take long to find a thread where someone else had the same issue I did. But I would imagine that for games that don't have the huge following Saints Row does, finding this kind of information will become a hassle over time, especially as more and more games get added to the Epic Store. Even then, just having a place to talk about the game built into the launcher is something I really missed from places like Steam and GOG. While there's reviews you can look at when browsing each game thanks to Epic's recent addition of OpenCritic, user reviews still haven't been implemented yet at the time of recording, a feature that's been around for years on Steam and has been around for even longer on GOG. While this process is likely done to prevent review bombing, user reviews can be just as important, if not more so, than mainstream review sites. There's tons of games out there that aren't properly reviewed or are even lucky just to get one article or video about them from a major press site. Recommending a game that has gone under the radar or warning people about a game in a terrible launch stage shouldn't be something that Epic needs to think about adding. It's something that should have been there the first year. There's a ton more features I could talk about that aren't available yet, like additional currencies, mod support, news feeds for games, achievements, and of course a shopping cart, which at the time of recording still isn't available. This is something that even Epic is aware about since they posted a development roadmap for their store on Trello and made it public for all to see. But considering the pandemic is likely having a huge result on the game industry, it's probably going to be a while before any of these features get added anytime soon. It sounds like there's a ton of bad things to say about the current state of the Epic Game Store, and with the storefront in its current stage, there really is, but that's not to say that there's no good to it. The constant free game giveaways are a nice gesture, even if deep down there's a feeling that this is just too good to be true. But when I was broke, I would have loved for the EGS to have existed at the time. From what I've experienced at the Mega Sale too, it was pretty great, with decent discounts on top of a constantly renewable $15 off coupon on purchases over $20, which also let me snag Control and Shenmue 3 for cheap. When the client doesn't pursue timed exclusivity deals and allows for multi-platform releases, some games like Death Stranding end up costing far less in my region than it does on Steam, which is a kind of healthy competition that Epic should be pushing for more of. I do wish that the EGS was in a better state though, as the current issues I brought up on top of the game situation kind of feed back into my fear about how viable the EGS is in the long term. By now we all know about how Epic scoops up games and makes them timed exclusive, especially back then when said exclusives were all games that had Steam pages before. But with the EGS in its current state, this timed exclusivity deal really makes it feel like if you try to support the Epic Store and the developers there, You're kind of paying to be a beta tester for when the game eventually launches on other storefronts like Steam, GOG, or even PC Game Pass to name a few. At times I think back to how Microsoft did things back in 2015 onwards, with how they made some games exclusive to the Xbox One for a certain period of time, like Rise of the Tomb Raider for example, before launching that on Steam and PS4. My problem with Epic's game situation also includes a lack of variety over timed exclusivity. Most of the games on Epic's storefront are modern AAA games, which is fine, but it'd be nice to see some more variety, either through smaller scale indie releases or more niche higher budget franchises, as right now it just feels like Epic is chasing after the latest flavor of the month release over anything that will stick with people for years to come. It's also a bit weird that for a company with such a huge background in PC gaming, a good chunk of their games aren't even available on their own launcher. Instead, you'd have to get them from places like GOG or Steam. Timed exclusivity is also something I'm not a fan of, not because it could be viewed as anti-consumer, but more because once it passes, there's not much the EGS can call worthwhile that it could also call its own. I mean, there's some games like The Cycle, which is a nice novelty and interesting take on the Battle Royale formula, there's Fortnite, which is a given, and there's also this partnership they're doing with Remedy for 2 multi-platform releases, which is kinda cool. But instead of focusing on timed exclusives, right now Epic should probably do more of what they're doing with Remedy, funding projects that otherwise might not get off the ground. Realistically, Fortnite won't last forever, so it's a good idea for Epic to use their Fortnite money just to grow a bit more and solidify themselves as a publisher that could take on a wide variety of projects. But that about wraps up everything I had to say about the EGS in its current state. Certainly not as awful as it was made out to be, but still in dire need of improvement. There's a few things I left out too, like Tencent's 40% share in Epic Games, mostly because that's a whole other can of worms, and I'm still waiting to see how things unfold right now. It's a topic I'll save for another day. In the EGS's current state, it's hard to want to use it much since it still feels like it's in the beta stage, and it kinda feels like you'll get more value just to poach free games from it than you would actually buying stuff from it. If that's just what you want though, then it's worth taking a look at the Epic launcher, but if you plan on buying games from it, it might be worth staying away for a year or so just to see if Epic is actually serious about becoming a worthwhile competitor to Steam. Otherwise, just stay away.